Way back in the ancient timeline, around 2560 BC, a single jagged line drawn in the shifting sands of Egypt wasn't just a mistake in the blueprints. It was a death sentence. We are talking about high-stakes spiritual warfare here. If the foundation of the Great Pyramid drifted even a fraction of an inch from the true north alignment, the pharaoh's soul would be cast into the outer darkness, spiraling into the void, locked out of the heavenly gates forever. The men standing there gripping those measuring cords, they understood the assignment. They knew this wasn't just about stacking rocks. These weren't your average architects or contractors looking for a paycheck. These men were the literal gatekeepers standing in the gap between a god-king and total oblivion. You have to understand, one careless angle, one rushed calculation, and the entire spiritual destiny of a dynasty shatters like a clay pot on a concrete floor. There was no grace period, no forgiveness, and definitely no do-overs. Now I want you to really meditate on this for a second. How in the world did a civilization with no MacBooks, no laser levels, and zero GPS technology manage to stack 2 million limestone blocks with such terrifying accuracy that it aligns perfectly with the Earth's axis? Even the engineers at NASA today are scratching their heads, unable to fully explain the precision. Everybody wants to jump straight to the aliens theory or talk about ancient magic because, quite frankly, the truth is a whole lot more unsettling. It was a small elite circle of palace astronomers, the hidden hand of their day, armed with nothing but wooden sticks, gut strings, and animal bones. They figured out how to weaponize the constellations and turn pure mathematics into a tool of absolute fear and control. The instruments they used had names that sound strange to our modern ears: the Merket and the Bay. The common laborers never even laid eyes on these things. But for the ruling elites, these simple devices were the difference between eternal glory and permanent damnation. In this breakdown, we are going to pull back the curtain on that secret world. We are going to reconstruct these ancient tools piece by piece, trace exactly how they locked their sights onto Thuban, the pole star of that era, and reveal how a handful of men with primitive equipment controlled the direction of humanity's most ambitious building project, effectively holding an entire civilization hostage to the laws of geometry. I want to know who is awake out there. Drop your city and state in the comments below. I need to see how far this message is reaching and where the remnant is located across the map. But listen, the path to the heavens doesn't start in glory. It starts in misery. It doesn't begin inside the gleaming sanctuaries or the gold-plated throne rooms. It starts knee-deep in the black sludge of the Nile, where laborers are breaking their backs, dragging timber that outweighs them by half. Before a single limestone block is ever placed on the Giza plateau, the kingdom is facing an impossible puzzle, a test of faith and physics. The question is, how do you build a measuring device that refuses to warp, refuses to rot, and refuses to lie? Specifically in a land where the heat and entropy make everything surrender to decay. If the instrument lies to you, the angle lies. And if the angle is deceptive, a divine soul is lost to eternal darkness. You see, the local Egyptian timber is absolutely worthless for this level of precision. Sycamore bends, acacia twists up, and palm wood splits exactly when you need it to hold distinct. The river humidity makes the local wood swell up like bread dough rising in an oven. Then the desert heat hits it and shrinks it right back down. A tool that changes its shape produces measurements that change with the wind, and fluctuating measurements mean you're scattering 2 million stone blocks across a crooked grid. The palace engineers understood this reality, and it filled them with cold terror. So the command comes down from the top, echoing south. Launch the expeditions beyond the cataracts, deep into the heart of the African interior, where the atmosphere is different and the forests grow a different kind of wood. They were hunting for ebony. Black as dried blood, dense enough to sink in water, like a piece of iron, and so hard that bronze chisels would shatter before the grain would give way. These supply missions weren't nature walks or adventures. These were full-scale military operations disguised as logging trips. The overseers carried braided leather whips that left permanent scars on the flesh. The porters moved in chains because desertion meant you were dragging your neighbor to his death. The armed escorts weren't there to fight enemy soldiers. They were there to force nature itself to submit to the will of the empire. When those ebony trunks finally touched Egyptian soil, wrapped in tree sap, and the sweat of human suffering, they were handled with more reverence than gold bars. Every single log was inventoried and locked inside a guarded royal compound. No craftsman could even get close without top-level clearance. Every splinter was accounted for. Wasting even a palm's width of this precious material was treated as high treason theft directly from the throne of the king. The atmosphere in the workshop makes the supply yard look like a vacation. This isn't a place where men are cracking jokes and sharing a beer after work. This is a silent furnace of anxiety. The master builder, a man named Sineb, stands there with a palace scribe who is writing down the name of every face that walks through the door. Each artisan's hands are assigned to specific critical tasks. The unspoken threat hangs in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. They know that if these instruments fail during the alignment ceremony, the leadership will know exactly whose fingers to blame. Sineb's opening instructions sound simple, but it cuts to the bone. Remove anything organic. Knots carry the memory of living branches. Curves remember the wind. Twists are just echoes of old storms. All of that natural imperfection must vanish. The ebony needs to become something that looks like it never grew, never breathed, and never changed. The raw blank of the merket starts as a brutal rectangle hacked free with copper-toothed saws fed by streams of grinding sand. The noise is absolutely savage. Copper grinding against ebony screams like metal being dragged across ceramic tile. The blades overheat. The teeth warp under the stress. Workers have to hammer them flat again and again, all while the deadline is breathing down their necks like a predator. Once the rough shape exists, the true punishment begins. The merket's upper face must achieve a level of flatness that belongs in the 21st century, not the ancient world. There are no precision machines here. No CNC mills to compare against. It's just abrasive stone scrapers forged from hardened copper and human patience stretched to the absolute breaking point. 4 assistants have to immobilize the beam, clamping it down, while a 5th man drags a grinding block across it in ruler-straight passes. He does this hour after hour until his shoulders are burning with fire and his vision starts to blur. Sineb tests the progress with a straight edge he has trusted for 20 years. If the surface dips even slightly, the plumb line will cant. If the plumb line cants, the star reading bends. And a bent reading aims the pyramid at an empty, godless sky. You have to understand the plumb line itself answers to no king. Gravity ignores politics and bribes. So selecting the chord becomes an obsession that borders on total madness. No twisted fibers that might unwind under tension. No hidden knots that could catch the air. No fraying edges that blur the true vertical line. The weight dangling at the bottom is carved from dense stone or cast in solid copper. It has to be heavy enough to murder any wobble to kill the vibration, but light enough that it doesn't pull the wooden frame off balance. Sineb's team tests dozens of weights in the open courtyard. If the bob sways too long in the breeze, it fails the test. If it swings too fast, it fails. Perfection is the only passing grade in this school. The merket slowly materializes a straight ebony beam with a raised block at one end where the cord will hang. That block gets scraped and polished until it feels like river-smoothed glass. Sineb makes his craftsmen close their eyes and drag their fingertips across every surface. If the skin catches on anything, even a microscopic burr, they go back to grinding. The finished tool isn't just an instrument. It is an accusation waiting to happen. Everyone building it understands the message carved into its existence. If this device lies, your hands are the reason a god-king wanders lost in the abyss forever. But the merket is blind on its own. It cannot see, it needs a partner that can aim. That partner is the bay. It's smaller, lighter, and somehow even more terrifying to construct. The bay is designed to frame the target star with surgical precision. Sometimes it's fashioned from the stiff central rib of a palm leaf or carved from sacred animal bone taken off the temple altars. In Sineb's workshop, the bone wins. Bone carries a spiritual weight. Bone satisfies the priest who will eventually have to bless these tools. The bay blank gets shaved down until it becomes thin and rigid like a slat of fired clay. At its tip, the critical incision happens. A V-shaped notch that will cage a star smaller than a grain of sand in the night sky. If that notch opens too wide, the target becomes vague and blurry. If it tilts even slightly, the angle corrupts downstream into thousands of misaligned stone blocks. Sineb's rule is absolute law. The star must sit inside that gap like a prisoner in a cell that is too small to turn around in. Cutting the V happens in total silence. Speaking might jinx the blade. One slip of the chisel murders weeks of accumulated work. The craftsman selected for this task isn't the fastest or the strongest man in the room. He is the stillest. Years of carving delicate hieroglyphic texts have trained his hands to divorce themselves from fear. But this situation is different. Botching a royal name earns you a beating. Botching this notch could earn you a severe beating, demotion, exile, or something far worse. Imagine your name attached to a failure that the scribes will record for all eternity. The V emerges in layers. First rough, then refined, then polished with fine abrasive until the edges feel like the inside of a seashell. Sineb holds the finished bay against a crack in the workshop wall where the afternoon sunlight slices through. He peers through the notch at that razor of light. If he sees fuzz, if he sees doubling, if he sees any distortion at all, he discards the piece without hesitation. There is no room for repair here. It is either perfection or destruction. And listen, not every rejection traces back to craftsmanship. Some of it is pure political theater. Rumors are spreading that the High Priestess Neferhotep may personally inspect the instruments before the alignment ceremony, and nobody wants to be found wanting in her presence. It doesn't even matter if the violation actually went down. Just the possibility of it is enough to set the whole operation on fire. Suddenly, every priest in the vicinity is looking over their shoulder, whispering about ritual contamination, like it's a spiritual virus waiting to infect the bloodline. We're talking absolute zero tolerance here. You have a craftsman who attended a burial 3 days ago. He's blacklisted, banned from touching a single tool. Another guy raises his voice at a supervisor boom, labeled spiritually unstable and kicked out to haul rubble in the heat. It's cancel culture ancient style. Precision here isn't just about geometry, folks. It is a performance for the powers that be. When the representatives from Neferhotep's inner circle finally roll up, the entire workshop freezes mid-breath. You could hear a pin drop in that room. These visitors aren't builders, they are loyalty auditors. They run their soft, manicured fingers along the ebony wood, understanding absolutely nothing about the technical side, but fully aware they are touching the king's ticket to immortality. One of them presses his palm harder than necessary into the polished merkette surface, silently daring anyone to object. And nobody does. The tools pass inspection because in this system, failure isn't just a mistake, it isn't survivable. If they hadn't passed that check, Seneb and his entire team might have found themselves buried alive in a foundation pit as protective offerings. From this moment forward, the merkette and the base stop being just physical objects. They become classified state secrets. Only a tiny elite inner circle receives permission to handle them. The chief astronomer, the man who will actually stand beneath the stars and aim these devices, swears a blood oath inside the temple sanctuary. He vows never to reveal the exact technique to anyone outside the Brotherhood. Not to his brothers, not to his sons, not even to his dying father. The knowledge is locked down tight. Breaking this oath doesn't just mean execution. It means total erasure. No tomb, no inscribed name, no chance at resurrection. For an Egyptian believing in eternity, that fate is infinitely worse than physical death. This secrecy has a strategic logic to it. You have to understand the same knowledge that aims a pyramid also predicts the Nile flood. If you know when the stars rise, you know when the river surges, you know when crops will flourish or starve. That knowledge is raw political power. The priests and architects will never hand that weapon over to the laborers who work for bread rations and weak beer. It is strictly gatekept to maintain control. While all this drama unfolds behind guarded doors, the Giza plateau transforms into organized chaos. Thousands of workers flatten bedrock drag sledges, weighted with rubble and sweat under a sun that punishes any hesitation. To them, the project is just muscle and dust and shouted orders. They hear whispers about sky readers and star sticks, but they never see these things. It's completely compartmentalized. Their universe is rope, burns, stone ramps, and foremen screaming over the wind. The invisible grid that will guide every block into position is being prepared somewhere far away in back rooms they will never be allowed to enter. Finally, the day arrives when the wood and the bone must prove themselves against the universe. Seneb's team carries the Merket and the Bey out of the palace district in a small, solemn procession. The instruments travel wrapped in white linen like sacred corpses. Two guards with bronze-tipped spears walk alongside. No one speaks, no one trips. It is dead serious. The smallest accident, a chipped corner, a cracked notch, would be interpreted as a divine warning. The pharaoh does not tolerate bad omens. They reach the cleared zone where the pyramid's base will eventually be etched into stone. By daylight, this area is absolute madness. Oxen bellowing carts, colliding dust clouds thick enough to choke you out. But Seneb ignores the chaos. The instruments are placed inside a small guarded tent and sealed tight. The real work only begins when sunlight dies and the sky turns black enough to reveal the architecture hiding behind the blue. As dusk settles, the energy shifts and the regular workers are pushed back from the central measurement zone. Only a chosen handful remain inside the perimeter. The chief astronomer, his two assistants Seneb, a pair of chanting priests and a ring of armed guards facing outward to keep the rabble back. Torches flicker at the perimeter kept low so their glow does not wash out the faint stars. The Merket emerges from its wrappings and settles onto a prepared stone platform. The plumb line is attached with trembling care. The Bey is checked one final time by touch alone. No one trusts their eyes until full darkness arrives. Then the waiting begins. Thuban, the pole star of that ancient era, is not dramatic about its presence. It does not blaze like Sirius. It does not call attention to itself. It hides among brighter neighbors easy to miss if you do not know exactly where to search. It's camouflaged in the deep. But these watchers have trained for this specific night for years. They know the constellations surrounding Thuban like they know their own children's faces. They know how the entire sky rotates around that single fixed point. They know there will be one brief window when the star crosses an invisible vertical line, the meridian pointing directly at true north. If they capture that moment, they will lock the entire pyramid complex to the spin axis of the planet with accuracy that will embarrass surveyors 4,000 years in the future. If they miss it by a blink, by a shiver, they will have to stand before a living god and explain why his eternal house now points at nothing. The chief astronomer steps into position. He raises the Bey to his eye. The V notch frames the empty black void. The priests begin a low, droning chant, not to comfort him, but to remind him that divine witnesses are paying attention. Seneb stands beside the Merket, one hand resting on the ebony beam, feeling the plumb line slowly surrender to absolute stillness. The guards watch everything, ready to seize anyone whose clumsiness or doubt corrupts this moment. Above them, the sky continues its ancient, relentless rotation. The star they need creeps toward its critical position, degree by invisible degree. There will be one perfect instant when the Beys notch the Merket's hanging cord and Earth's rotational axis align into a single dead straight line of sight. When that instant arrives, the stakes couldn't be higher. They either seize that split-second opportunity or they lose absolutely everything. The moment arrives without announcement. No trumpet, no signal fire, just a speck of ancient light crossing an invisible threshold in the darkness. The chief astronomer exhales and locks the Bey into position. The V-notch swallows the night. His entire universe collapses into a tiny triangle of blackness. Everything else, the guards, the chanting priests, the desert wind, dissolves into nothing. He calls out, voice low but knife sharp. Seneb braces the Merket eyes, drilling into the plumb line. The cord hangs absolutely vertical, a black thread slicing through starlight. Hold! The astronomer's voice splinters. His arms scream with the tension. The Bey gains weight with every heartbeat. Thuban drifts toward the center of the notch. The priests stop breathing. This single moment will define everything Egypt builds for the next 1,000 years or destroys. The cord bisects the star. For one heartbeat, the universe freezes. Mark! Seneb barks a command. An assistant drops to his knees and hammers a wooden stake into the dirt directly beneath the plumb bob. Another man already positioned along the prepared sight line drives a second marker home. The cord, the star, the notch, the two stakes. One line burned through dust and terror. Then the star slides past. The trance shatters. The astronomer lowers the Bey. His hands tremble violently, sweat runs down his forearms. No one claps, no one congratulates. This is survival. Seneb raises his palm. Everyone freezes. The priests scan his face for any flicker of uncertainty. He walks to the first stake, examines the hole, studies. The line connecting both markers feels the direction deep in his skeleton. It is as straight as human hands can make it, as straight as anyone without machines could ever hope to achieve, but one reading proves nothing in this game. "We repeat the process," he says. The guards shift irritably. The priests exchange annoyed glances. The astronomer looks like he might collapse right there. But Seneb does not care. One observation could just be an accident. Two observations that match become law. They reset everything. Earth rotates, hours bleed away. When Thuban crosses the meridian again on a different night, the same ritual repeats. Bay-raised, Merket steady chord, motionless stakes driven. When Seneb compares the new line to the previous one, the markers nearly kiss. The difference is so small, he has to kneel in the dirt just to detect it. That is when certainty arrives. A line pointing to true north, not magnetic north, not some estimate based on sun shadows, but the actual rotational axis of the planet beneath their feet. And with that confirmation, the plateau transforms. It stops being random rock. It becomes a canvas ready to receive instructions. They stretch a rope between the stakes and snap it. Dust marks the ground in a clean scene. It's in surgical scar. This right here, this is the north-south axis, the spine of the world. You have got these high priests leaning in, squinting at it like they are diagnosing a sick animal. They are chanting, murmuring their little blessings, acting like their words carry weight. But Sembi, he knows better. He knows their rituals are just empty air that controls absolutely nothing. What actually controls the destiny of this kingdom is this invisible geometry his team is holding right now. That is the baseline. From there, the crew maps out the entire reality of the structure. They stretch these ropes knotted at exact intervals, building a massive right angle. Modern folks would look at that and say, hey, that is a 3-4-5 triangle. But these guys were doing it way before it was cool. They do not have a fancy mathematical name for it yet. To them, it is just the way, a technique handed down from the ancient temple builders who came before. But watch this: when those lengths snap tight and the triangle closes, boom, you get a perfect 90-degree corner, a true right angle that does not lie. And just like that, the east-west axis is born right here on the Giza plateau. They drive in more stakes, stretch more lines. It is a constant process of verify, then verify again. They do not take chances. They measure the diagonals between the planned corners with an obsession that borders on madness. They have to. They need a perfect square. If they mess up, they end up with a twisted parallelogram. And let me tell you, a crooked foundation would be a humiliation the throne would never forgive. Every single time a measurement drifts, even a hair off the mark. Senbi barks the order. Pull them up, move them. You can hear the workers groaning, see the guards glaring daggers at them, but everyone gets the message. You make a mistake now and you are carving that error into stone for all eternity. By the time the sun cracks the horizon, the layout is locked in. You cannot see a single limestone block yet, but the ghost of the Great Pyramid is already haunting this ground. It is etched into the dust, the taut ropes, and those charred wooden markers. It is already there in spirit. The common laborers, they will never comprehend what they are actually doing. They think they are just piling up a mountain of rocks. They do not realize they are filling in a precise diagram that was practically downloaded from the sky. But as soon as that first light hits the plateau, the priests step in to steal the show. They stand right there on the marked axis, throwing their hands up toward the sun, proclaiming that the gods themselves sent down the blueprints for the throne. Notice what they leave out. They never mention the ebony sighting beam. They conveniently forget to mention the plumb cord or the bone notch. They take hard human calculation and flip it, transforming it into divine revelation right in front of the masses. And the crowd, they eat it up. They believe every single word. Semba just stands there watching the theater in silence. His part is done for the moment. He knows the real score. The gods did not hand anybody a golden compass. His team had to dismantle the night sky star by star and translate that cosmic data into a rule scratched right here into the dirt. Now, the construction frenzy really ignites. Workers are carving trenches that track exactly along those marked lines, cutting straight down into the living bedrock. The spine of this pyramid is not just sitting on the ground, it is being sculpted directly out of the plateau itself. The north-facing edge that gets a special level of paranoid attention. Every stake, every single chisel mark in that zone is triple-checked. You see collars getting grabbed, ears getting twisted. No one, and I mean no one, is allowed to just guesstimate. That north face is the critical edge. It speaks directly to the Earth's rotational axis. As the tiers of blocks start stacking up, do not think the Merket and Bay are retired. Oh no, they come back out for every critical stage. Senb uses the Merket to track shadows at high noon, confirming that the foundations match exactly what the stars dictated in the dead of night. When that shadow at true noon falls precisely along the north-south line they drew, he allows himself a moment of grim satisfaction. For now, the heavens and the earth are in agreement. But these tools serve another purpose, a secret function that the common workers never get to witness. On those nights when the construction site finally falls silent, Senb and the chief astronomer get summoned away. They go to a viewing platform down near the river where the temple astronomer and the senior priests are gathering in the shadows. They bring the same instruments, but they are not aligning pyramids down there. They are reading the future of the Nile itself. They use the Bay to track not just Thuban the North Star, but other critical celestial bodies. They are watching for the first dawn appearance of Sirius. That is the star whose arrival acts like an alarm clock for the coming flood. They record exactly how many nights pass between these celestial events and the swelling of the river waters. They are constructing a silent calendar inside their minds and on secret papyrus scrolls. Then when the pattern becomes clear enough, the priests walk out before the public and announce the will of the gods. They predict exactly when the flood will arrive, like they have a direct phone line to the divine. When the water rises, everyone stares in absolute wonder. No one understands that the same piece of bone used to pin down the pyramid's axis is also being used to control the rhythm of famine and abundance. It is total control. Senb sees the manipulation clearly. He does not particularly care though. He gets compensated in grain and high status. As long as his tools are respected and his reputation remains safe, he is happy to play his role in the machine. But one of his younger assistants, a sharp-minded guy named Keti, actually gives a damn. Keti grew up among the dirt farmers. He remembers his parents staring at that river, praying, guessing, just hoping for survival. Now he stands behind these priests as they recite prophecies built from the very measurements he helped collect. He feels a fire burning in his chest every time a priest pretends to hear a god that never actually spoke a word. He keeps his anger quiet. At first, years just roll by. The pyramid rises tier by tier, massive and imposing. The casing stones start catching the sunlight like mirrors. The alignment they established years earlier continues guiding the whole operation. Huge ramps spiral upward. Supply routes carve permanent scars into the desert floor. Keti's responsibilities expand. He is no longer just a boy fetching water. He is permitted to handle the Merket without Senb hovering over his shoulder like a hawk. He even gets to hold the Bay during routine verification checks. And that is exactly when he notices something that turns his blood to absolute ice. One night during a recheck of the northern alignment for a new secondary structure near the main pyramid, Keti raises the Bay. He tries to lock onto Thuban exactly as he was trained. The star is there, sure. But something feels wrong. It takes him longer to center it in the notch. The timing seems shifted from the year-marked notes he keeps memorized in his head. He tries to dismiss it. Maybe it is just exhaustion playing tricks on his eyes. Maybe atmospheric haze is distorting the view. But the discomfort lodges in his mind like a splinter he cannot pull out. So he starts paying closer attention. Over the following seasons, as they continue using the Merket and Bay to refine layouts of minor structures, Keti detects a disturbing pattern. The sky's fixed point is not perfectly fixed. Thuban's path through the notch is changing, moving almost too slowly to perceive, but it is moving. The crossing times are creeping forward. The angle seems to slide only by the smallest imaginable amount, fractions of a degree, but it is enough for someone obsessed with precision to sense it instinctively. He raises the issue cautiously with the chief astronomer. He suggests, perhaps the original readings years ago were less precise. The older man avoids eye contact and says, "We were younger then, less disciplined." Keti knows instantly this is a lie. He knows exactly what the chief astronomer means. 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 He knows exactly what the Those first nights represented the most meticulous work he has ever witnessed in his life. The old man knows it too. His gaze drifts toward the temple where the priests sleep peacefully under painted ceilings, absolutely certain that the heavens never change. If the sky itself is drifting, then the foundation of their entire belief system is unstable. It means the eternal stars are not eternal. It means the fixed pivot of the universe is sliding by tiny degrees. The universe is not a frozen clock, it is a moving target. Keti stays silent in public, but his mind is racing. In private, he begins carving secret marks in hidden locations on the inner surface of a tool chest on a rock near the observation platform. Dates, angles, positions. He's attempting to track the drift. He has no name for what he is discovering yet. He just knows something enormous is wrong with the world. Eventually, his small acts of curiosity betray him. One evening, Senbi discovers one of the hidden marks. It is a line scratched behind a storage rack accompanied by a small symbol that only a trained observer would recognize as Thuban. There is an angle, a date, and a notation suggesting a comparison with a reading from a previous year. Semb waits until morning, then drags Keti aside way away from the noise of the labor gangs. His voice is low and sharp as a razor. Why are you carving measurements in places no one authorized? Keti tries to deflect to play dumb. Semb refuses to let him escape. Under the heavy weight of his master's stare and the distant attention of a guard who is pretending not to listen, Keti breaks. The truth pours out of him. The star is moving. He says, I can prove it. The alignment is shifting, not dramatically, but enough. It is not fixed, not forever. We need to account for this. Or what? Senbi interrupts him. Or the universe crumbles. Or the priests lose their authority, or our king's soul misses its destination. The words hang between them like a suspended blade waiting to drop. If Semb accepts what Keti is saying, everything they have sold to the throne as eternal becomes temporary. Every perfect line they drew is actually matched to a sky that is slowly sliding away. The Great Pyramid itself might one day point at absolutely nothing that matters. The entire machine they are constructing would be exposed as a mere snapshot in time, not a timeless structure. But if Semb rejects it and buries the observation, he will be deliberately choosing safety over truth. The carved idols on the temple walls stare back with cold indifference, locked in stone, while the world around them shifts. But the people, they stay asleep, clinging to rituals, while Keti is becoming a serious liability to the establishment. Seneb watches the young apprentice closely. The kid's jaw is set like granite, and looking into his eyes, you don't see fear. You see the burning fury of a man who knows too much. That is a volatile combination. Intelligence mixed with righteous anger. Seneb doesn't say a word, he just gives a sharp nod toward the restricted tent where the sacred surveying tools, the Merket and the Bay, are locked away during the day. The message is loud and clear, it's put up or shut up time. They are about to run a test that could shatter the foundation of their entire belief system, and they're doing it with an audience. We're talking witnesses, high-ranking priests and powerful men who absolutely do not want to hear that the heavens have stopped following their scripts. Tonight, under the suffocating gaze of the palace elite and the sharp bronze of the royal guard, they have to raise the bay one more time. And here is the terrifying reality. If Keti is right, the star that is supposed to anchor the pharaoh's soul for eternity refuses to stay in its assigned seat. The heavy fabric of the tent swallows every bit of outside light, creating a void where only the truth remains. The oil lamps are burning at a whisper, casting long, twisting shadows that look like serpents in the smoke. The tension is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Nobody wants to be here, but the hierarchy demands it. Seneb takes his position by the Merket, the ebony beam sitting perfectly on its platform, the plumb line hanging dead still in the breathless air. Keti grips the bay, his hands trembling just enough to show the strain. He can feel the weight of the room, every pair of judgment-filled eyes drilling holes into his back. You have the priests in their spotless white linens acting holy and the guards gripping their heavy clubs ready to crack skulls at a moment's notice. Then there is the royal inspector, a direct operative from High Priestess Neferhotep's inner sanctum, standing there like a statue absorbing every detail for his report. Show us. Seneb commands, his voice void of emotion. Keti swallows the lump in his throat and steps up. He lifts the sighting tool, aligning it with the ancient scratch marks in the earth, The sacred geometry they carved years ago when they first froze true north into the dust. That line isn't just a scratch, it is the law. It governs the entire pyramid complex, dictating the angle of every stone. Every massive wall, every ramp, every polished casing stone takes its marching orders from that original calculation. Keti squints through the V-notch. Thuban is up there all right, but the star is acting rogue. It is not where the dogma says it should be. It is sitting just slightly off-center, not a massive jump, but enough to make his stomach drop into his shoes. "Lift it higher," one of the priests barks, sensing the hesitation. "Your anxiety is polluting the ritual, you are disturbing the gods." Keti snaps back. "I'm not disturbing a thing." His voice is quiet, but it's got steel in it now. The star is not where it used to be. The atmosphere in the tent instantly turns hostile. Seneb steps into the younger man's personal space. Forget the old stakes. He orders changing the protocol. Aim directly at the star itself. Ignore what the ground says. Look at what the sky is doing. Keti does as he is told. He shifts the instrument, letting the V shape eat up the darkness until the star Thuban sits perfectly in the crosshairs. Seneb adjusts the Merket until the vertical line slices right through that exact point. He calls for fresh stakes. New markers are hammered into the dirt with a dull thud. When they bring the lamps down to compare the new line with the old holy mark, the discrepancy is undeniable. These lines aren't identical twins anymore. They're barely distant cousins. The shift is tiny, measured in the width of a finger stretched over a mile, but to men who built their entire civilization on the concept of absolute perfection, this looks like the apocalypse. One of the senior priests speaks up first, desperate to save face. The original calculation was flawed. He lies smoothly. The gods are merely correcting the mistakes of our ancestors. This boy is arrogant and sloppy. He is confusing his own incompetence with the movement of the heavens. That tears it. Keti steps toward the priest and the guards instantly tense up, muscles coiling. The original line was flawless, Keti argues, risking his life. We checked it 1,000 times. We built an empire on that math. The sky has shifted. It moves across the ages. The stars aren't frozen statues. You know I'm telling the truth. You looked through the notch, you saw the chord. He turns to Seneb, eyes pleading, demanding, begging his mentor to have a backbone and stand up for the reality they just witnessed. But Seneb's face is a mask of stone. He isn't looking at Keti. He's looking at the politics, the temple, the court, and the massive pyramid rising outside. He knows the stakes. If he admits the pole star drifts, he is admitting the Pharaoh's eternal pathway to the afterlife is broken. He's admitting that the imperishable stars are actually subject to change. He would be saying the gods aren't what the priesthood claims they are. The royal inspector finally breaks the heavy silence. The king's tomb is already 50% complete. He says, his voice like dry parchment. The axis is already carved in stone. The chambers are planned, the shafts are measured. Are you trying to tell me this sacred structure is defective, that the king has no GPS to the stars? I suggest you choose your next words with extreme caution, boy. Keti opens his mouth to defend the truth, but Seneb cuts him off at the knees. The young man has been making unauthorized markings, Seneb announces, lying through his teeth. I've been keeping secret records of his errors. His calculations are a mess. He spends too much time staring at the sky and not enough time doing his job. The original line is the one we honor. The stars test men. Men do not test stars. The priest let out a collective breath. That is the verdict they needed to hear to keep their power intact. The inspector relaxes his shoulders. The guards loosen their death grip on their clubs. Keti stares at Seneb like he's watching the sky fall down. You know that's a lie, he whispers. You know what we saw tonight. You felt it. You witnessed it. Seneb doesn't even look at him. He turns to the priests, washing his hands of the situation. The instruments remain pure, he says cold-bloodedly. Any confusion belongs to the operator. Remove him from the project if you wish. These holy tools cannot be held by hands that doubt. That's the death sentence right there. Keti is dragged out of the tent before the sun even thinks about rising. No public execution that would just make people ask questions. He just vanishes into the belly of the beast, the system that eats anyone who doesn't fall in line. Maybe he ends up in a quarry, a border fort, or digging a drainage ditch 1,000 miles from the Nile. There will be no name carved on his tomb. He gets zero chance to leave his mark on history. The next morning, the machine keeps turning like nothing happened. The original North Line stays the law. The layout doesn't budge. The pyramid keeps rising. But here is the thing: the truth didn't die with Kheti. It survives like a parasite eating away at Seneb's mind. Every time he looks up at Thuban, every time he sees it sitting just a little to the left of where the sacred texts say it belongs, it haunts him. He feels the ground beneath his own beliefs shaking. He guards the secret with his life. He burns the scrap of papyrus where he copied Kheti's true numbers. He protects his paycheck, his family, and his future burial plot. Yet when he stands in the half-finished grand gallery staring up at that dark shaft carved toward the heavens, he understands what it really is. It isn't a permanent highway to God. It's a weapon aimed at a moving target. Years dissolve into decades. The king who ordered this great pyramid is getting old and grey. The pace of work shifts from frantic panic to laser-focused precision. The outer construction ramps are dismantled. The inner passages get their final polish. The alignment that started in the Nile mud that night with the Merket and Bay now reaches into the heart of the stone mountain. Deep inside, the shafts are cut with obsessive, paranoid care. One aims south toward Orion's belt, the celestial home of Osiris, the god of resurrection. The other aims north, targeting the region around Thuban, the pole star that used to hold the sky still. Nobody calls it precession of the equinoxes yet. No one has the physics formulas for the Earth's wobble. But the men in charge understand one terrifying fact: if they match the architecture to tonight's sky, the king's soul will have its launch trajectory. On the day of the burial, the tools that started it all are nowhere to be found. The Merket and Bay are rotting in a chest in some dusty back room. The wood is dried out and cracked. The cord is brittle and useless. The alignment work is done. Now, ritual takes the wheel. The king's body travels through corridors lit by flickering torchlight. The priests are chanting their spells. Thick incense chokes the air, masking the smell of death. Somewhere hundreds of feet above those shafts wait in silence, aimed at coordinates chosen through a mix of fear and devotion. The coffin descends into the chamber where all those invisible calculations come together. The workers seal the passages forever. Massive granite plugs grind into position, sealing the tomb. The sound booms through the pyramid's core like thunder. Outside, laborers haul the final white casing stones into place, polishing the faces that point with insane mathematical precision toward the 4 compass points. Seneb stands way back, watching the gold capstone gleam under the punishing sun. He knows the secret that inside geometry and blind faith have been welded together permanently. He also knows that far above the pole star that once matched their line of sight perfectly will slowly, inevitably wander away. He feels a twisted kind of admiration. "We did our part," he mutters to himself. "Let the stars figure out the rest." He dies years later, buried in a respectable tomb. No one carves a hint of doubt on his walls. The official narrative wins again. Centuries roll by. The sand shifts, dynasties crumble, and new kings build smaller, cheaper knockoff pyramids. The exact technique of using the Merket and Bay becomes blurred, then hidden, then classified, then a rumor, and finally forgotten entirely. The ebony wood rots the bone splinters. The cords turn to dust. But the stone remembers. Long after Seneb, long after Neferhotep, long after the priests and their guarded scrolls turn to ash, the Great Pyramid still dominates the Giza plateau. Its outer casing has been stripped by thieves, its chambers ransacked by looters, but its base remains locked to the earth with an alignment error so microscopically small that it absolutely humiliates modern engineers. Surveyors from this modern era arrive on the scene carrying their high-tech baggage instruments, metal sighting rods, digital compasses, and laser theodolites. They set up shop on the plateau, ready to measure each side's angle against true north, fully convinced they are the pinnacle of intelligence. They run the calculations, looking for the deviation. They honestly expect to find roughness. They anticipate the clumsy limitations of what they consider a primitive society. Instead, what they discover is a misalignment of roughly 3 arc minutes that is just 3/60ths of a single degree. We are talking about an error so microscopic that across the entire length of one side of that massive structure, it amounts to barely a hand's width. Let that sink in. The Great Pyramid is aligned more accurately to true north than the building you are sitting in right now. It puts most modern city streets to shame. And of course, the predictable excuses start flying. They claim the ancients had unlimited time. They say they used endless slave labor to brute force the geometry. They say they just copied someone else's design. What most people in the West refuse to accept is the straightforward explanation because it challenges their worldview. The builders used their sky. They utilized the laws of gravity given by the Creator. They used a patience sharpened by the terror of failure. They used simple tools like the merket and the bay. They did not require iron. They didn't need our digital displays, and they certainly didn't need help from little green men. All they needed was a straight beam, a true chord, and a star positioned close enough to Earth's axis to serve as a cosmic hinge. But by the time we arrive in 2026, standing in the shadow of the Sphinx with our 4K cameras and GPS receivers, the star Thuban no longer sits anywhere near the pole. The planet has tilted, slowly caught in a wobble spanning millennia, what the ancients might call the shifting of the ages. A different star now claims the north. Now the shafts inside the pyramid no longer point at the celestial targets they once locked onto with such precision. But to those with eyes to see, that only makes the achievement more devastating. The pyramid has become a stone time capsule, preserving a snapshot of a sky that no longer exists. It is a witness to a heavens that has passed away. When we try to reconstruct the merket today, cutting a straight beam from hardwood, polishing a resting block for a plumb line hanging a weight, and watching it settle to absolute stillness, we are not playing with toys. We are placing our hands on the same heavy problem that kept Pharaoh Khufu awake at night. It forces you to ask, how straight is straight? How still is still? How much error are you willing to tolerate when a king's eternity hangs in the balance? This was spiritual warfare manifest in stone. When we carve a bay from wood or bone, use a saw to cut a precise V shape and then walk out into a dark field to align it with Polaris, we taste that ancient pressure. Our arms shake, our eyes water from the strain. We realize immediately that the limitation is not the tool. The limitation is the flesh. It is the human body trying to hold itself steady during the one instant that actually matters. Modern people insist that aliens must have been involved because they simply cannot accept that black men operating with human hands, human fear and human obsession could reach this level of precision with such primitive equipment. But the story stripped of those excuses is worse and far more impressive than any extraterrestrial fantasy. It was a handful of men surrounded by soldiers and monitored by a priesthood transforming raw materials into extensions of planetary geometry. They were tapping into a knowledge that has been systematically suppressed. They understood the Nile could be predicted by the movement of the stars. They understood that a king's legacy and their own physical survival depended on getting a line right while the rest of civilization slept. They weaponized knowledge. They concealed it. They constructed a machine that fused the stone of the earth and the starlight of the heavens into a single system. Did they defeat death? Khufu is gone. Khufu is gone. The priests are dust. Their words have been consumed by the march of time. But the line they scratched in the sand that first night still exists. Locked in limestone, the pyramid still faces a north that no longer matches its original master star. It stands as a stubborn rebuke to the shifting world. The shafts still aim at regions of space that no longer hold the same celestial targets. The universe moved on. Their structure stayed. That is the real horror and beauty of it. The disconnection between the temporal work of man and the eternal shifting of the cosmos. They believed they were building eternity. In reality, they built a frozen snapshot of a cosmos that keeps shifting. They anchored their king to a sky that across thousands of years slowly walked away from them. And yet through that failure, they created something that still crushes our confidence today. Every time we measure the pyramid and encounter that laughable 3/60ths of a degree error, we confront a question most people avoid looking at. With all our technology, with all our modern arrogance, would we be willing to stake our souls on our own measurements for the next 5,000 years? When you watch this, understand you are not simply observing blocks and angles. You are witnessing a war against the drift of everything. The Egyptians wielded the merket and the bay as their weapons against chaos. We wield cameras and software, but we are losing the battle. The mission remains identical: impose order onto a world that refuses to stop moving. If you made it this far, you belong to a tiny group of people who can now see through the noise and the deception. You understand that behind the sanitized museum displays and the simple textbook explanations, there was fear, secrecy, arrogance, sacrifice, and a level of precision work that should terrify us more than any conspiracy theory about visitors from the sky. Thank you for staying until the end. If you want more stories that strip the surface off ancient mysteries and expose the raw machinery underneath, hit subscribe and turn on all notifications so you never miss the next deep dive into the truth. Drop a like if this transformed how you see the Great Pyramid. And share this with that one friend who keeps insisting aliens built everything because they can't handle the truth about human potential. Let them witness what real human obsession can accomplish when we are truly awake.